Hi, everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to go give you a brief overview of digital forensics, kind of give you some big picture ideas of what the field is about and how it works. So, data is everywhere. It's in our lives, all over. This is some data that shows, and I'm sure it's old by now, by the time you're watching this, that we just use and consume and create so much data in so many different ways. And of course, all of that is available and accessible because of the technology. So, from a forensic investigation perspective and digital forensics, there's just so much out there. In fact, it's almost too much, and that's why it's important that as a forensic investigator, you have a methodology and you are able to really go through and identify what data is necessary for your case and how to get it. So here is a really neat diagram from a 2017 article called Taxonomy of Digital Forensics, Investigation Tools and Challenges. Really interesting by Rana Sanswal Khatter, Khatter, and Singh. And basically, it shows the relationship between digital forensics, the digital forensic investigator, and the process. So, at the top, you have the scene, you have the victim, you have the suspect, right? And we talk about this idea that every time something happens, some data is created. And that data is, of course, evidence, right? And evidence can come from any or all of these places. So the investigator first has to identify the evidence. They have to acquire the evidence. They have to preserve the evidence. They examine and analyze it, and then create documentation around it. Now, in the legal process, we're working with attorneys primarily, whether civil or criminal. There's a report generated or some form of presentation. They are also worried about the chain of custody, the evidentiary issues, the legal principles of authenticity. And of course, all of that comes into play when the decider, whether a judge or a jury, hears or sees what evidence and analysis was conducted. So all of these have a huge interplay, and it's really important for the investigator to understand the whole process because that's where their value is. They uh, can't just worry about one single piece of this. They have to understand the entirety of it. So in the early days, we talked about computer forensics. Now we've really moved into the digital forensics. And this is because, right, everything has changed. Where the evidence is being found is very different. Digital includes much broader aspects of forensics, not just the computer itself or the hard drive. But we look at all digital media. We look at the internet. We look at websites. We look at open source data. We look at, again, the hard drive, but also smartphones, USBs or thumb drives, networks, servers, smart devices, even things like copiers and printers. They all have some form of digital artifact that could be useful depending on what the nature of the case is. So when we see digital evidence, we really should, again, see this from a holistic perspective. We want to look at the hardware, computers, laptops, servers. We need the digital media. We need the files, right? The raw content. We also look at email and mailboxes and mail servers. Um, there's still backup data storage. Um, and of course, mobile devices, right? Most every single person has a mobile device of some form or another. Many people have multiple forms. So all of these play into it. When we talk about files, we're really talking about documents, presentations, emails, spreadsheets, internet histories, databases, software applications. These are all really important pieces of proving a case. Same with mobile devices, the phone itself, the apps, any text or instant messages. Um, you have photos, call history logs, contacts, even things like locations. These are all part of the technology underneath the actual application or content. So, from a digital forensics perspective, we look at three different types of data. User generated data is like content, so what was actually written, say in a email or a document. Computer generated data, which is the information that the computer automatically populates. And then we have metadata, so data about data. So in I'm gonna show you an example because I think it's all three of these are really important. Sometimes we get hung up on one or the other, but again, from a holistic perspective, we need all three. So a friend of mine took this picture of me speaking at a conference. It was very nice. They provided me via text the image. So the user generated data in this perspective is the actual image itself, right? Now the computer generated data is what the phone generates. So for example, the file name, so img-0012 was the file name. The date that it was taken, the time it was taken. Sometimes it could be the location. There's all sorts of other computer generated data that could be useful here. Now the metadata is the data about that data. So things like the file size, the file path, when it was used, when it was accessed, how it was accessed, where it went, the source, the device information. All of these things are really can be very important. But again, from a forensic investigation perspective, you need to know all three. You need to be able to connect all three because that is how we have credibility and that's how we do our holistic investigation. So digital evidence can be the target of a crime. So the device itself could be used or used by the perpetrator. They could be tools or instruments of the crime. So think of a server that's used for hacking. A digital device could be a repository or storage of evidence of a crime. Again, you could have that piece of information that resides on the suspect's thumb drive. They could certainly be the fruits of a crime. So, for example, the digital information for a Bitcoin wallet, right? That has been stolen through like a SIM swap. It could also be electronic media that was created for, by, or even after a crime has occurred. So you think of even a robbery, right? Somebody robs a store and then takes a selfie with, the stainless steel tumblers of a certain brand that they stole. Right? That is a piece of evidence. So again, all of these things, thinking about them from that perspective can be really, really helpful. So again, we talked about how smartphones are pretty much everywhere. What kind of evidence can you find just on a smartphone? Contacts, emails, you have all sorts of phone numbers, contact lists, the messages, the text messages, any audio files, uh, photos or videos, calendars, any kind of notes, A lot of mapping software and GPS applications are on there. Some of the other apps themselves, certainly emails, and of course the internet browsing history. Again, this is why when you look at a cell phone, it's really important to see it as a piece of evidence and treat it as such. So digital evidence is important because it provides evidence to either support or refute the allegations. It may also provide additional information or context about the overall subject or the investigation. And it also enables verifiable evidence to be obtained and admitted when it is done properly and is authenticated. And of course, it also helps from an intelligence perspective because if you're building a profile that you could use, for example, in an interview or for other investigative purposes, it's all really, really helpful. So all of these play a crucial role in the collection and analysis of evidence. Now, there is no easy button. As much as we would love to be able to use the easy button, and certainly technology and digital forensics has come a long, long way since I started, where you really had to know a lot about what was going on under the hood. You still do need to, but the days of, for most investigations, the days of carving files is gone, frankly. Um, I had a friend who once said, if you have to go into an explanation of, you know, very, very arcane technical terms, you're probably going to lose the jury, right? If that's what you're hanging your case on. Technology supports the human activity that forensics undertakes, right? So it's our skills, it's our knowledge, it's our experience in forensic analysis that actually is what is important here. The technology is merely a supporting or user-friendly factor. Forensics is important to support an investigation because as a team, we all need to be on the same page. We need to play from the same playbook, know what we're talking about. And that's really important about vocabulary and using that vocabulary and educating others. And that's why this course is so important, right? Because that's what we're doing, giving you a baseline foundation for the vocabulary, for the processes, and for the technology. So, of course, one of the most important things about digital forensics is don't go beyond your scope, right? Don't go beyond what it is that you are trained to do, what you are comfortable doing. Um, when necessary, call a professional. Even if you are well versed in many things, you may not be well versed in everything. So this is an example of a network server that I came across during a search warrant, and it's pretty intimidating, right? And you don't necessarily know, and I had not been trained at this point on server acquisition. So, um, it was really important that I had other people that I could call on when needed. So let's talk about some of those common forensic terms. So let's talk about first about forensic image or an image. An image is a bit for bit copy. It's an identical copy of the media that's being acquired. All those ones and zeros. It is sometimes called a mirror copy or a mirror image. It's basically the exact same thing, right? Um, Now, we'll get more into the imaging, but again, we're just going over the basics of the terms. Media can include hard drives, CDs, all sorts of other things, phones for sure. To make an acquisition or acquire a forensic image is the process to get that. And again, we'll talk more about this, but that's acquisition is important. Forensic analysis is about using automated software or tools to search, find, and sometimes extrapolate or carve files, because this is what is most important to the investigation, right? And again, it's our analysis, our examination, and our application of the technology, the law, and the facts to what happened. So again, we kind of talk about the process here, thinking about it from identifying evidence, acquiring that evidence, preserving that evidence, examining it, analyzing it, and then documenting it. Now, some would argue that preservation should come first, or should be around all of these, and I would agree, right? Preservation of digital evidence is so important because it can dissipate or be erased or even accidentally mishandled, and we have to be very, very careful. So I would argue preservation is really first of all of these, or should be on all of these issues. 3 steps in this process are acquiring or creating that forensic image, conducting the analysis using our tools, and then presenting what we found in a clear, sensible, easily understood manner. Some people say, well, how long does it take? And it depends, right? Context is very, very important. You can't rush these things. And again, sometimes you have to prioritize because you can't get to everything. So you really have to think about this in a holistic manner. Like many other investigations, forensics can be cyclical, right? The analysis may require acquisition of new media, which then feeds further analysis and then ultimately results in presentation. So you just don't know. Garbage in, garbage out. So you have to be really, really careful about what it is that you're looking at and how you're doing it. In digital forensics, a thorough, methodical analysis that withstands the scrutiny of the judicial process and the rigor of peer review takes time, right? These technology can be very fickle and sometimes requires multiple ways to look at something. So it's really important to think through how that goes and what your plan is. So again, going back to our methodology, that is why it is really important to have a good methodology ready to go, that you can rely on. Again, this takes so long, right? Um, you know, each case varies in complexity. We also often have multiple caseloads, or caseloads of multiple cases, and so that is a challenge, right? We can often only move at the speed of our tools and of the other stakeholders in the process. Um, and again, with any analysis, we really need to be partnered with the lead investigator or the lead attorney because that is really important to understand and be in lockstep, because that is the best way to really do the best analysis, right? Of course, the more information you have, the greater the time it takes to go through it. So, um, a gigabyte um, is basically a pickup truck, right? That's a lot of time. Now our tools can help, but again, not always, and it depends on what it is we're looking for and what the case is. Again, we've talked about context so much, and I don't want to um, beat a dead horse, but it is so important, right? We have to be able to really understand what is going on. Without that context, we're likely to be doing a fishing expedition, which is very problematic from a legal perspective. But it also could be in terms of being stuck, um, or being lost. And again, we don't have a lot of time on these things, and everybody wants everything now. So we have to really prioritize. The two-way street for information is really what's necessary for success. So, from an investigative perspective, I think it's always important to remember safety first. Um, we have to know what our legal authority is. We have to be very careful about identifying evidence because it could be hiding in plain sight and we're just not aware of it. And of course, we've talked about case context, but this is where having um, either the attorneys, the prosecutors, or the legal counsel available. This is a very evolving area of law, and we need experts, the legal experts as well, to help navigate that. If we don't recognize potential value, we may lose it, right? And evidence has to be handled carefully because digital evidence is easy to erase or damage. It can get damaged or even destroyed, even inadvertently. And that's why the training as a digital evidence specialist is so important. And this is the first step in that. Of course, teamwork is the key to most investigations. And again, these details about what we do, how we do it, why we do it, is really helpful. Knowing what to seize, what to leave behind, and knowing that the process is a cycle, but make it a virtuous cycle, not a vicious cycle. Really go in with an open arm or open eyes and an open mind. Um, Involve computer forensic experts early in your investigation. Keep the prosecutors or legal counsel and management informed throughout the entire case. Um, do pre-seizure planning, which will help alleviate problems. Um, and don't overwhelm the forensic examiner with lots of data, especially if it's not apparently useful. We don't we want to use the right tools for the right job. So, using a sledgehammer to drive a nail is probably not our best bet. One of the things that we often don't focus on in digital forensics is the importance of interviews, right? Um, Interviewing is really helpful in these types of cases because they can really shed more light on a lot of issues. Triaging is about really understanding and prioritizing what's available, what's there, um, what's happening. Triage helps do our job better and especially helps the forensic analysis. Have those key questions ahead of time, and if possible, actually include the forensic examiner in that interview if it's possible. And certainly, if they're, all the documentation, all the consent forms, all those things should be thought about. Now, I always stress that there's two types of interviews in digital forensics. There's the technical interview, which is all about the various technology available and how it's accessed. And then, of course, there's the admission seeking interview. I generally recommend against combining the technical interview with the admission seeking interview. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it's the only shot that we have with an individual, but if it's possible, try not to do it. Or at least have a break in between so that you can regroup and see what's next. Documentation is so important. Detailed contemporaneous notes that are kept is really important. I love taking photographs and videos of the setup as found. This is an example of one of them. Um, Labeling things, making diagrams, especially for more complex scenes, is really important. And then also looking for passwords and other information written on the desk or in a drawer, or even in a subject's possession, right? These are all really important things because at the end of the day, when you're testifying in court months or years later, those notes are going to be really valuable to your testimony and will help your credibility. So I hope that you've enjoyed this brief presentation, and I hope you found it useful and interesting. Obviously, there's so much more here. We've just scratched the surface, but I hope you like it. I really want to thank the my friend Jim for letting me use this original presentation as a jumping off point. I've updated it a number of times since he wrote it in 2012. So really appreciate it, Jim D. You're the man. So as always, there's a lot of changes that always happen and in the technology and digital forensics. But just remember that digital forensics is everywhere, and evidence is now in many, many places. And just thinking about what is possible will go a long way. So, hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, let me know. And thanks for joining.